All right, I am going to be reading to you from the book of Judges. We've been in the Judges all through the month of July. Today will be our final sermon in this series. But today we're going to be looking at the fifth judge in the book of Judges. So we started with Othniel, then Shamgar, then Ehud, who we talked about last week. Then we moved into Deborah and Barak, which we talked about the first Sunday in July. And today's judge that we are going to learn about a little bit is Gideon. And so he comes to us appearing for the first time in chapter 6, verse 11. And so we're going to be reading 11 through 18. I invite you to use your own Bible, or if you want to follow along on the words on the screen, please do so. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak of Ophrah, which belonged to Joash, the Abrizite, and his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon answered, "But sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has cast us off and given us into the hand of Midian." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. I hereby commission you." He responded, "But sir, how can I deliver Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord said to him, "But I will be with you, and you shall strike down the Midianites, every one of them." Then he said to him, "If now I have found favor with you, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Do not depart from here until I come to you, and bring out my present and set it before you." And he said, "I will stay until you return." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You know, in the Holy Land and all around the area that encompass the ancient Near East, they are constantly doing digs. There are excavation sites going on all over that region of the world because it is such a rich area for human history. I mean, one of the things that makes Israel so distinctive is that it sits at the crossroads of major trade routes on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea. It was the place that people traversed throughout centuries. I mean, for millennia, people have been doing that exact same thing. When you do excavation over there, what often is the case is that as you dig down into the ground, you don't only discover what was there in terms of an ancient civilization, but you dig deeper and you find out that there was one below that, and you dig deeper and there was another one below that. If you go to the Holy Land even today, you'll see things that are called tells, T-E-L. And a tell basically means that one civilization came and built upon another one, or one culture, one community built upon the ruins of another one. Now, whether that was because they conquered those people or whether it was because it became uninhabited and they built on top of that, that was something that they did over and over again. And today, there are tells that are basically what amount to human-made mountains, just because there was one group of people living on top of the next for thousands of years, literally. In fact, there are some tells that they have discovered 19 or more layers of different communities of people that had lived in that same exact place. If you go on the Holy Land trip next summer, we're going to see a couple of those. Tel Megiddo is probably the most well-known of all of them, and there's some fascinating history there. So they were excavating in Israel just earlier this spring. And this time they were looking in an area just south of, in the Judean foothills, not too far from Jerusalem. And they came across a piece of pottery, which isn't in and of itself a remarkable discovery. I mean, that's going to be something that they find regularly. But this piece of pottery was found next to another broken fragment of pottery, and they put them together, and they found that this was probably a vase or some sort of vessel to carry water or wine or something like that in. And it had an inscription on it that was very faint and hard to read in this ancient, long-dead language. And the significance of this particular piece of pottery was when they started to date it backwards, they found that it was approximately 3,100 years old. So 3,100 years, quite a long time, pretty remarkable. The reason I bring that up today, in part, is because that's how long ago the period of the Judges were. So even today, if you are doing excavation, there are still people who are discovering things from the time period of the Judges, where we find this particular story about Gideon today. So the story of the Judges is just a quick review for those of you who haven't been here yet this month or haven't heard one of these Judges sermons. Judges is a book that falls right after the time where the Israelites have come out of bondage in Israel. They go into the wilderness for 40 years, and then they are allowed to enter the promised land under Joshua's leadership. They go into the city, they drive out the people who live in that area, and now this is their land to live in. And so everything should be okay, except for what they find is that there are still neighbors who are rather hostile about their presence in that place, which I guess stands to reason that you could expect such a thing to happen. I mean, you go and you occupy a land and you chase out the inhabitants of that land, there are going to be people, remnants of those people that are not too happy about it. And so there are folks that are at war with the Israelites constantly. And things are good as long as they seem to be remembering their identity and worshiping God, the true God, the God of Israel. But then what happens is there'll be a leader who dies, and then the people will start to worship the foreign gods, the gods who are worshiped by the neighboring communities, and they will worship them, they will worship and bow down to idols, and then things start to go bad again. Things get off the rails, and the Israelites find themselves an oppressed people again, and they pray out to God, God, deliver us, save us again. And so God sends a deliverer, also known as a judge, who comes in, usually as a military leader, helps them achieve their independence again through military conquest, and then everything is peaceful in the land until that leader dies. The people start to worship foreign gods, and the cycle continues over and over and over again. We're already on our fifth round of that cycle already by the time we get to just the sixth chapter of the book of Judges. And today's story is a little bit different than some of the other ones, because in the past we've had military leaders who were obvious choices. This person is Ehud. He was somebody who clearly knew what he was doing. He was able to furnish his own weapon and think of a sneaky way to assassinate King Eglon. We talked about that last week. Barak was already a military general. He just needed the confidence and the accompaniment of Deborah to go with him into battle at God's urging. I mean, these are the stories that have been a part of Judges so far. So today's is a little bit different. We hear about this guy named Gideon in this story. And Gideon has been working in the fields. He's brought in some wheat. He's in the wine press. He's cleaning out the wheat, and he's going to take some food home to his community and to his family. And all of a sudden, an angel of the Lord, some mysterious visitor, appears. And the visitor has this message for him. You are going to be a leader. You are going to be a leader who will deliver the people from the oppression of the Midianite people, who have been, by the way, making things really hard for you. So the Midianites were a neighboring group. They came in, they chased all the Israelites into the hill country, and they were literally living in cliffside dwellings. Some of these cliffs you can still see today. But the cliffside dwellings, and the people were fearful and hiding out. And every time the Midianites would come and do a raid, they'd take the livestock, they'd burn all the growth of the crops on the ground, they'd kill anybody that they found, and then they'd go back to their area again. And so this is a really awful time for the people of Israel. So God says to Gideon, you're going to be the next leader. And Gideon says, I don't think so. He said, I'm not a military guy, I'm not a leader. I come from the smallest family, so I don't even have brothers who would be good in an army here. And I'm from a really small clan, and we're just not powerful, so I think you got the wrong guy. And God says, no. I'm God. I will be with you. It's going to be okay. And Gideon says, if you are who you say you are, can you prove it to me? God says, what do you have in mind? And he says, well, let me go prepare something. If you'll just stay here, I'll be right back. And the mysterious visitor, AKA God or an angel of God, says, okay, I'll wait for you. And that's where we left the story this morning. So then Gideon comes back, and he's got a lamb prepared, and he's got some bread, and he's got some wine, and he sets it out before this mysterious visitor. And then God miraculously just consumes it. It vanishes. It's gone. And Gideon says, whoa, okay, I guess you are who you say you are. I'll take you seriously. God says, great, let's get to work. And Gideon said, whoa, wait. But we also know from our teachings and our faith tradition that if we ever see God face to face, that we won't live to tell about it. So am I going to die? And God says, nope, you're going to be okay in this situation. Okay. Next step. Okay, what do we do from here? God says, okay, here's the first step. You are going to go and you are going to take this altar that your people have made to Baal or Baal, the Canaanite god of fertility represented by a bull, and we hear a lot about Baal or Baal in the Old Testament. You're going to take that altar that the people have made to him, you're going to tear it down, and these two poles that they've got, you're going to rip those down as well. And Gideon says, okay, I'll do it. And God says, great, be courageous. So very not courageously, Gideon goes in the middle of the night, he gathers up a group of his buddies, and they quietly tear the thing down. The next morning, people wake up to find that their altar has been destroyed, and they're upset about it, and they said, who could have done this? And then they all somehow figure out that it's Gideon. Gideon, did you do this? Maybe. Okay, come here, let's talk. This is going to be your problem. And if Baal is angry at you for doing this, then that's on you. And so we are not going to call you Gideon anymore. We're going to call you Jerubbaal, which means the one who has to contend with Baal. Jerubbaal, the one who has to contend with Baal. So now throughout the rest of this story, the Bible writer talks about Gideon and Jerubbaal alternately, but they're one and the same. Now here's the interesting thing. Remember I told you about those two pieces of pottery that were discovered at that archaeological site? When they looked really closely at the lettering and they translated what it said, the word was Jerubbaal. They found the name Jerubbaal on a pot from 3,100 years ago in 2021. How remarkable is that? So God says, okay, you did the first thing. Now we're ready. Let's get the army together. Let's go take on the Midianites. And Gideon says, can you prove again to me that this is going to go okay? And God's like, fine. What do you need? And Gideon apparently has some different ideas about what kind of proof he's looking for than maybe you and I would do. So he says, okay, how about this, which is kind of bizarre. He says, I'm going to get a piece of fleece and I'm going to lay it on the ground. And tomorrow when I wake up, I'm going to ask you to make all the ground wet, but keep the fleece dry. God says, kind of bizarre, but okay. Gideon wakes up the next morning, the fleece is dry. Lo and behold, aha! God says, satisfied? Can we go to war now? Gideon says, can you prove it to me again? God's like, yes. Okay, do it in reverse. Make the fleece dry, or the fleece wet, but the ground dry. The morning dew is on the ground, but the fleece remains dry. God says, fine. Wakes up the next morning, boom, there it is. Are you satisfied now? Okay, I believe you are God. I believe you are with us. I believe you are calling me to this task. Let's go do it. And so Gideon then assembles this army, and they're ready to go. He's got them paying attention. For some reason, they are all following his lead. Maybe he's been convinced enough by God that he is just speaking with great confidence and authority. And so everybody goes out, and they're ready for battle. And God says this time, your army's too big. What? Can you have an army that's too big? We're going to battle against our enemies. And God says, well, here's the problem. Your army is so big that if you are victorious in battle, which you are going to be, then people are going to credit the size of the army rather than credit you as people of God and see this as my doing. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your army and I want you to go to them and I want you to say, hey, who's nervous about this? Who's a little squeamish about going into battle? And then those who raise their hand, you send them all home. And you just keep the people who want to go to battle. Okay? Gideon does it. Half the army goes away. And God looks at the army and says, it's still too big. And then God's probably thinking, you know that weird thing you made me do with the fleece? I'm going to do something weirder. And he says, I want your army now to go down to the water's edge. And I want you to watch, and I want you to take count of who is down there, and I want you to watch. Some of the guys are going to go down, and they're going to get down on their knees, and they're going to cup their hands, and they're going to drink water from the stream like this. And others are going to get down on all fours, and they're going to lap at the water with their tongues like they're dogs. Send the dog people home, and you keep the cup people with you. And so Gideon's like, didn't see that one coming, but okay, fine. And he does it, and he keeps the cup hand people. And now we've got just a couple hundred people, and God says, okay, now this is the army the right size we're looking for. Now you're underdogs. Let's do this thing. Gideon takes them into battle. No surprise, they rout the Midianites, and there's peace in the land for many more years. But all the people then look to Gideon and they say, wow, Gideon, Jerubbaal, you are awesome. You delivered us. You are our judge. You are so good. You're going to be our king. You're going to be our leader. And when you die, we want your son to be our leader. And when your son dies, we want your son's son to be our leader. And we're going to be great, and we're going to have a kingdom, and we're going to have this lineage, and it's going to be this great thing, and we're going to be just like our neighbors. And we're going to have exactly what we are looking for. And the world will look at us and they'll say, you've made it. You're just like everybody else. And Gideon, to his credit, says, nope. It's not about me. The credit goes to God. And we go, as readers, we go, somebody got it right. One of these people didn't make it all about themselves. And now there's a chance, and we feel like this is going to be good for Israel. And then Gideon says, but if you did want to do something for me, and then you go, oh no. If you did want to do something for me, you know when after the battle and we won and you kind of went and you raided and you plundered and you got a bunch of gold from that? Well, why don't each of you bring me a gold earring? Oh, brother, here it comes. And I'm going to melt down all those gold earrings. And immediately we're thinking, oh my gosh, he's going to make a golden calf. And he doesn't do that. He makes a golden ephod. And an ephod is like a clerical garment that would have been worn for ritual worship. And he says, okay, I've got this golden ephod. And everybody says, ooh, that's really pretty. And very, very predictably, they start to worship the ephod. And you just want to hit your head against the wall and say, oh my gosh. And then Gideon dies and it all goes haywire again. All right, so I've told you that the challenge when you read through Judges is, okay, there's interesting stories, and there's intrigue, and there's violence, and there's excitement, and there's espionage, and all this stuff, and it makes for a great tale, but so what? What is the thing that we are supposed to get out of this? Is there a message in here? Is there an underlying truth? Is there something that we can take away from this? Yeah, it's interesting, but what do we do with this? Well, here's the thing. What I really appreciate about Gideon's story is that it tells us something I think very timeless about human nature. We see Gideon, and he's just an average guy. And when God approaches him, he's really skeptical. He doubts that he's the right person for the job. He thinks surely there's someone else that's better suited for this task. When God says, no, you're the one I want, he says, well, are you really God? And God says, yes, prove it to me. And he proves it, 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 if I got my count right. It's never quite enough for Gideon. He's never quite fully convinced to the point where he says, yes, I'm there, I'm all in, I'm ready, no reservations, just take me, I'm ready, at your disposal. And I don't know very many Christians like that, honestly. There's some. There's some that if God came to them in a vision or in some kind of thing, that they would say, no, I know what this is. I've been preparing for this. I'm ready for this moment. God, make this revelation in my life complete. Make this clear to me. Give me an epiphany. And they say, without reservation, I am here as your servant, ready to serve, and I will do exactly as you ask. But most of us would try to explain it away. That's irrational. I don't know, it was the setting I was in. I was overtired, I was emotional. God didn't really mean that. Maybe I just got it wrong. No, that doesn't add up. I'm not the right person for the job. And so we end up saying things like, well, maybe God is actually leading me toward this, but I don't have the time for that right now. Or maybe if I had a little bit more resources at my disposal, I could make that work. Or maybe if things were a little bit different in my family situation right now, or maybe if I had more education, or I had the right amount of training, or if I had a whole group of people who were willing to go with me and do this together, then I could just do a little part of it and not the whole thing. And does this sound familiar at all? I mean, I feel like there's a lot more of Gideon in us than we would care to admit most of the time. There's a part that is skeptical. There's a part that no amount of evidence would ever quite be enough, because we end up wanting to talk ourselves out of something more than it is a lack of faith on our part. Even for the lower grade things, the things that aren't nearly as pivotal, not life-changing stuff, but we still find ways to just sort of dismiss it and to say, well, maybe another time. Now's not great. Somebody else. Ask somebody else. So these little tuggings on our hearts, we find a way to excuse them and make them go away. There's also the part of Gideon that just when everything seems right, he finally listens to God. He does exactly as he's told, and things go exactly like God described them. And even after all that, he gets the most important thing right, which is, no. I don't get the credit. God does. And then within moments, he screws up. That feels familiar too. In Romans, Paul talks about how I do the very thing that I don't want to do. And most of us, when we come across that passage, we go, yeah, right, exactly. The things that have gotten us into trouble, the things that distance us from God, the things that cause hardship in our marriage or hardship in our relationships with other people. So much of that is stuff that we go, I knew better, but I did it anyway. I slipped into that. I was tempted by that. I fell into that. I got lazy on that. I stopped participating on that. Little things became big things, but it happened little by little. We don't usually just choose to walk in to disaster. It happens in a little more sneaky way than that. So that feels very familiar about Gideon's story too. So I think there is a part of this that we say, yes, we are going to be imperfect people. We are going to mess up. We are going to be in need of redemption. Which then is the other part of this story, which is Gideon teaches us something about our nature, but God reminds us in this story something about God's nature. Don't ever forget this. God sees things in us that we don't see in ourselves. That is absolutely true. God's messenger comes to Gideon and says to him, "Greetings, mighty warrior." Already forecasting what things are going to be down the road, but Gideon cannot hear that. He's like, who are you talking to? At the moment this is occurring, Gideon is in a wine press. Now, a wine press in biblical times is not like a modern day antique wine press where you've got some sort of a big crank in a barrel thing where it cranks down on the grapes and it squirts out the wine or the juice below. In biblical times, a wine press was a community wine press, and wine was the thing that they had all the time. So a wine press was something that resembled something of a wading pool, or bigger, like a deep pool. And many people would get into it at the same time, and there would be beams that went across the top with ropes that came down. And you'd hold onto the ropes and you would stomp onto the grapes like this. And many people would do this all day long. And they had to hold onto the ropes because it got slippery and they didn't want to fall into it. So they're holding it, and then there was a little drain in the corner that would drain into another pool, and that's where they would gather up the juice or the wine as it came out. So Gideon is in a community wine press, but he's not stomping grapes. He's working with wheat, not the right thing to be working with in a wine press, which is why if we were reading this as people with sort of an ancient understanding, we'd understand that Gideon is really chicken. I mean, he's taken the time to literally come out of his cave, come down into the valley, gather up some wheat, and hide it in a wine press so that the enemy Midianites don't see him if they happen to be in the vicinity that day. Now, I'm not blaming Gideon for this. It sounds like a pretty prudent thing to do, honestly. But it also is a bit misleading to be called then a mighty warrior as you're hiding out from the bad guys. So God comes and says, "Greetings, mighty warrior," and Gideon's like, "Not your guy. I don't see it. Smallest family, smallest tribe, not a warrior, hiding in a wine press." God says, "Hang in there. I got this." The idea that God sees something in us, I think, is just essential for us in our understanding of what it means to be Christian people. This story falls not very well in the book of Judges, but it falls much better in the larger story, the larger narrative within the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition of God continuing to select the people who would be the underdogs and the unlikely to fulfill God's purposes. And if we fast forward then to the Gospels, we find that Jesus is absolutely doing the same thing again when he recruits his disciples. Remember, if we know anything about how rabbis would select their students, it would be like, the most selective process imaginable. They're looking for the Ivy League students of the time, right? They are looking for the best of the best. And so these are the people that are being recruited by the rabbis, and then everybody that's left goes on to do what their daddy did. And Jesus comes along and he finds fishermen and he finds tax collectors, and later he's going to find in Saul, he's going to find a tent maker, and he's going to say, "I want you. Because I see something in you that no one else sees, and I see something in you that you can't even see in yourself, and I want you to be my disciples, you to be my followers." And if we fast forward that again, we find that those people are in this room today. And they're seated in amphitheaters and on benches and on church pews around the world today as people gather for worship and are reminded that they are God's people and that Christ wants each one of us. He invites us in and calls us mighty, calls us courageous. And he wants us to be the ones who carry his message forward, who reach out in service and concern to the world, who's uninterested in all of the reasons why we can't do it, and much more interested in supporting us and saying, "I'm going to help you. I'm going to walk with you. We're doing this together." This message from Gideon, it may not be the clearest to receive in reading this story, but if we look beneath the surface and we look for the truths in this text, I think we'll find something of our own nature in this story of Gideon. But we'll also find something about God's redeeming powers for each one of us. I hope that you will carry this forward for whatever the week ahead brings you. Whether it's challenge, whether it's joy, or whether this is the week that God is subtly nudging you or whispering something to you, encouraging you to do something that you might have otherwise dismissed and said, "Not now, not me, not the one." And look for the ways that God continues to reach out to you and to say, "Greetings, you are mighty, you are powerful, you are good, and I see you as the ones who will carry my message into this world."